Well, down to business. I'm certain I'm not the only one to be fed up to the back teeth with this Black Lives Matter mob and everything associated with it. Mind you, the public spoke today. You could have fitted those who turned up into a couple of telephone boxes. The police were magnificent, and typically when they didn't mess around issuing fines, the diminished minority ran for cover. Well done to Commissioner Fuller, Assistant Commissioner Willing and all his team. But cop this. After the protest leader Gibson was fined $1,000 for breaching a public health order, Mr Gibson was whisked into State Parliament through the back entrance by the Greens MP Jenny Leong. The Greens should change their colour to Marxist red. This defiant behaviour, though, sickens decent Australians. No points, though, to the Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, normally a very sensible fellow. In asking people not to protest for public health reasons, he talked about, quote, the absolute nobility of their cause. You kidding me? A couple of points first. The death of George Floyd in America was an affront to humanity. No one condones that. And the right to protest, of course, is central to a democratic society. It's called freedom of speech, which unfortunately is denied to most if they're not from the left. Nonetheless, in all things, the freedom of one individual has to be weighed up against the limits imposed by the law and the freedom of others to live without enduring unnecessary risk imposed by others. But even that's not the most important point, because these protests are based on palpable untruths. In July 2017, also in Minneapolis, Mohammed Noor, a black police officer, fatally shot the Australian Justine Damond through the side of his police car. All the 40-year-old white Australian woman was trying to do was to report a possible sexual assault in the alley behind her Minneapolis home. There was no universal protest, nor should there have been. Authorities dealt with the matter. The bloke is in jail. But now to the lie that Black Lives Matter because white people and police don't care about black people. The latest American Department of Justice figures on crime indicate that the number of black or African American victims of murder on the latest statistics were 2,870. In only 243 cases was the offender white. In 2,570 cases, the offender was black or African American. That is the truth. That is the fact. These protests are based on untruths. I can understand protesters fiddling with the truth, but there's no excuse for political leaders to be silent about what Donald Trump would call fake news. As I've said many times, every death diminishes us all. But in 89.5% of the murders of black or African Americans, the offender was black or African American. Fact. So what are these protests about in Australia? Indigenous Australians. If people think by jumping on the bandwagon they're supporting Aboriginal Australians, well, they are not. Simple question. How many of these people would ever put their hand in their own pocket to help an Australian in need, let alone an Indigenous Australian? Well, I'm sorry, I have. And I'm sick and tired of protesters ignoring the truth about Indigenous Australia. The first truth is this: there are real problems in Indigenous communities. Aboriginal women and children are suffering because of sexual abuse and family violence. But the truth is, Aboriginal people are dying at a far greater rate at the hands of other Aboriginal people. That is a fact. The latest Australian Institute of Criminology statistics shows 70% of the 765 homicides involving an Indigenous person in the 22 years to 2012 were committed by an Indigenous person. 70%. That is a fact. Yet these protests vilify police. Only through the support of police and authorities can these appalling circumstances in Aboriginal communities be addressed. How do maligned white Australians help? Well, over $30 billion a year of taxpayers' money is spent on closing the gap. Indigenous Australians receive approximately $10 billion in welfare payments. That's almost $14,000 per person a year. Non-Indigenous Australians receive about $6,000. Then there are millions of dollars to Indigenous communities through mining royalties. So why do Australians have to cop these constant attacks about being racist? But when someone like Jacinta Price, an articulate and outspoken Indigenous Alice Springs councillor, raises these issues, when she says, quote, some segments of the Aboriginal community spend too much energy on being perpetually aggrieved and not enough on attending to the real issues the community faces, she's attacked by these Marxist protest types. When she was elected in 2015 to the Alice Springs Town Council, she was told, quote, if I see you anywhere around Alice Springs, I'm going to punch the F out of you, you see. One prominent Indigenous Australian told Jacinta Price publicly, quote, "How about you effing die a painful death, you sellout coconut? You need to be eradicated like the disease you are." No sanctions, by the way, for making such comments, but they're so violent and vile that they frighten others who know the truth from speaking out. So where are our political leaders on all this in promoting the truth? Is there one political leader in Australia today who will politely tell these protesters that their facts are wrong and they're achieving nothing? Greg Hunt talked about the nobility of the cause. What? To tell lies and threaten people? Promoting emotional rhetoric over fact won't address any of the problems faced by many Indigenous people, especially women. But as Jacinta Price says, and is vilified, the statistics prove that Aboriginal men are more likely to be the victims of Aboriginal men, and notes, quote, "The greater threat to a black person's life is not a white police officer, but another black person." This stuff in the streets is dishonest. It's self-indulgent. It does nothing to advance the cause of anybody. And yet, if you listen, we're all told that Australia is built on genocide. Genocide is the annihilation of a race. This language is biased and untruthful, but while it goes unchallenged, it will continue. It'd be nice for one political leader to step into the ring and tell these people they're out of step on fact and function. But as we know, there's a crisis in Western political leadership, and we're paying a savage price for it.